Police and Thieves, sung by Junior Mervin, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. It's been a week since Rolling Stone published its article on General Stanley McChrystal that eventually led to him being fired by President Obama. In the piece called The Runaway General, McChrystal and his top aides openly criticized the president and mocked several top officials. Joe Biden's nickname, Bite Me. National Security Advisor General James Jones is described as a clown. Ambassador Richard Holbrooke is called a wounded animal. Since the article came out, Rolling Stone and the reporter who broke the story, Michael Hastings, have come under attack in the mainstream media for violating the so-called ground rules of journalism. New York Times columnist David Brooks penned a column attacking Hastings for being a, quote, product of the culture of exposure. Brooks wrote, quote, "The reporter essentially took run-of-the-mill complaining and turned it into a direct challenge to presidential authority." He goes on to write, "The exposure ethos, with its relentless emphasis on destroying privacy and exposing impurities, has chased good people from public life, undermined public faith in institutions, and elevated the trivial over the important," he said. On Fox News, Geraldo Rivera attacked Rolling Stone reporter Michael Hastings for publishing quotes McChrystal and his aides made at a bar.
This is a situation where you have to put it in the context of war and warriors and honor and the penumbra of privacy that is presumed when it's not on the record specifically. When you're hanging out at a bar waiting for a plane or a train or an automobile and you're stuck together hours and hours and you're drinking in a bar or you're at an airport lounge, this is not an interview context. These guys, particularly the staffers who gave the most damning statements about the civilians in office, including the Vice President of the United States, these guys had no idea that they were being interviewed by this guy.
I'm not sure about that,
This reporter,
Geraldo.
wait, hold on, Bill. This reporter from Rolling Stone, he was a rat in an eagle's nest.
So that's Fox News. But other mainstream media outlets have also attacked Michael Hastings for writing the story. This is Lara Logan, the chief foreign affairs correspondent for CBS News, being interviewed by Howard Kurtz on CNN.
If you had been traveling with General McChrystal and heard these comments about Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Jim Jones, Richard Holbrooke, would you have reported them?
Well, it really depends on the circumstances. It's hard to know here. Michael Hastings, if you believe him, says that there were no ground rules laid out. And I mean, that just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because if you look at the people around General McChrystal, if you look at his history, he was the Joint Special Operations Commander. He has a history of not interacting with the media at all. And his Chief of Intelligence, Mike Flynn, is the same. I mean, I know these people. They never let their guard down like that. To me, something doesn't add up here. I don't believe it.
The Washington Post quoted an unnamed senior military official as saying that Michael Hastings broke the off-the-record ground rules. But the person who said this was on background, wouldn't allow his name to be used. Is that fair?
Well, it's kryptonite right now. I mean, do you blame him? The commanding general in Afghanistan just lost his job. Who else is going to lose his job? Believe me, all the senior leadership in Afghanistan are waiting for the axe to fall. I've been speaking to some of them. They don't know who's going to stay and who's going to go. I mean, the question is really, is what General McChrystal and his aides were doing so egregious that they deserved to end a career like McChrystal's? I mean, Michael Hastings has never served his country the way McChrystal has.
That's Lara Logan, the chief foreign affairs correspondent for CBS News, being interviewed on CNN. Meanwhile, both the Washington Post and ABC have published articles quoting anonymous military sources attacking Hastings' Rolling Stone article. For more on the story, we're joined by the award-winning investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker John Pilger. Began his career in journalism, nearly half a century ago, and has written close to a dozen books and made over 50 documentaries. He lives in London, but is in the United States working on a forthcoming documentary about what he calls the war on the media. It's called The War You Don't See. We welcome John Pilger to Democracy Now! John, welcome. Talk about the war you don't see.
Well, the war you don't see is expressed eloquently by the New York Times, that range of extraordinary media apologists that we've just seen. The reason we don't see the war on civilians, the war that has caused the most extraordinary devastation, human and cultural and structural devastation in both Iraq and Afghanistan, is because of what is almost laughingly called the mainstream media. The one apology, not these apologies that we've seen this morning from Fox to CBS, right across the spectrum to the New York Times this morning, the real apology that counted was the New York Times when it apologized to its readers for not showing us the war or the reasons that led up, rather, to the invasion of Iraq that produced this horrific war. I mean, these people now have become so embedded with the establishment, so embedded with authority. They're what Brecht called the spokesman of the spokesman. They're not journalists. Brooks writes about a culture of exposure. Excuse me, isn't that journalism? Are we so distant from what journalism ought to be, not simply an echo chamber for authority, that somebody in the New York Times can attack a journalist who's done his job? Hastings did a wonderful job. He caught out McChrystal, as he should have done. That's his job. In a country where the media is constitutionally freer, nominally, than any other country on earth, the disgrace of the recent carnage in the Middle East and in Afghanistan is largely down to the fact that the media didn't alert us. It didn't report it. It didn't question. It simply amplified and echoed authority. Hastings has proved, God bless him, that journalists still exist.
You know, it's interesting to read the first paragraph of Hastings' piece. He talks about, yes, this group in a French bar. And by the way, Rolling Stone said, you should see what we didn't print, because in fact there were things they said that were off the record. But to say that Hastings violated the off-the-record rule, they said, was not the case. There was many things we didn't print. But right after they talked about the French, he talked about the French bar and McChrystal and his high officials and the bar, his aides, you know, dancing and singing the words Afghanistan, Afghanistan. Hastings writes, opposition to the war has already toppled. The Dutch government forced the resignation of Germany's president, sparked both Canada and the Netherlands to announce the withdrawal of their 4,500 troops. McChrystal is in Paris to keep the French, who've lost more than 40 soldiers in Afghanistan, from going all wobbly on him. But this is something most people in this country don't know, that the U.S., despite the U.S.-led coalition, the NATO troops, is very much almost going this alone.
Yes, it's going it alone in terms of the American people. And what journalism like Hastings does is represent the American people. A majority of the American people are now opposed to this colonial debacle in Afghanistan. I mean, I was very interested to read what President Obama said about Afghanistan. If I can find it, yes, here it is. On February the 10th, 2007, quote, "It's time to admit that no amount of American lives can resolve the political disagreement at the heart of someone else's civil war," unquote. That's what President Obama said before he became president. And unless the people of the United States, like the people of Europe, like most peoples in the world, understand that this is a long-running civil war, that it needs the kind of sympathy, if you like, for the people of Afghanistan. It certainly doesn't need this brutal imposition of a colonial force there. Now, that happens to be a truth that the likes of Michael Hastings and others are expressing. But it's also a forbidden truth. And the moment you even glimpse that truth in the United States, the kind of barrage, the grotesque sort of cartoon barrage of Fox, right up to the rather sneering barrage that comes from the New York Times, through to CBS and so on, the barrage against truth-tellers becomes... Amy, we're dependent now on the few Hastings, but also on whistleblowers. The most important expose was the WikiLeaks expose of the Apache attack on those journalists and children in Iraq. And here they are prosecuting the whistleblower when, in fact, those responsible should be prosecuted. But that's verboten now.
I just want to encourage people to go to our website at democracynow.org. We interviewed Julian Assange, who's on the run now, afraid that he will be